Hi, rePROs. I wanted to tell you about a podcast I really love. It's called Seriously, and it's an irreverent but accurate take on reproductive rights and other local political issues in Louisiana and other red states. Whether you live in a state with backwards laws or you're in a blue bubble, you'll love getting an inside peek on their legislative shenanigans from Michelle and Ellie, a reproductive justice advocate and attorney fighting the good fight and shit-talking the whole way through. You can find out more about Seriously on their organization's website, liftlouisiana.org, or subscribe to Seriously from Lift Louisiana anywhere you listen, including YouTube. Hi, rePROs. We have a special feed drop for you today. We thought you might be interested in the White Picket Fence podcast. This season, they're doing a deep dive into the gender backlash, a backlash so swift and severe that it sometimes feels more like whiplash. They're talking about the ways that gender has become a Trojan horse, a way to advance an extremist and increasingly authoritarian agenda that harms millions of Americans. Over the course of this season, they examine the many ways that this backlash is showing up in policy, in culture, and in the media content that we consume every day. And while the Trump administration may be the political epicenter, this anti-gender movement is not contained in one administration or even just the U.S. It's global, it's multifaceted, and it's going to have a long-term impact on all of our rights and freedoms. But to start, they focus on the people whose rights, whose very existence has been targeted most directly, transgender Americans. And so with that, let's do a sneak peek of episode 1 of this new season of White Picket Fence.
It will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
Back in January, on his first day back in the White House, Donald Trump signed a controversial executive order. It stated that there are only two genders, and that those genders are inherently tied to biological sex. With one signature, Trump denied the existence of roughly 2 million transgender and non-binary Americans. And that's not counting the millions of people born intersex. This statement from the leader of the free world was simple and devastating.
The order leaves many with unanswered questions about what this means for their everyday life.
You're told that you don't belong, whether it's in the women's room, whether it's in a job, or whether it's in public life.
I know that there are transgender children right now looking out at this world and wondering if anyone is going to stand up for them.
We find ourselves asking our legislators, why don't I deserve the same rights as anyone else?
The shock and awe is the point of it all. The chaos is the point. And I hate to say it, but I believe that the cruelty is the point too.
When is this going to stop? When is enough enough?
Trump's executive order also served as a clear warning. A broader, long-brewing backlash had reached a boiling point. I'm Julie Kohler, and this is White Picket Fence. Over the past 5 seasons, our show has tackled a variety of topics. The complicated politics of white women, care, motherhood, marriage. Topics that have been at the forefront of my work as a writer, family social scientist, and gender justice advocate. Topics that are also deeply personal to me as a woman, a mom, a single parent. We have chosen these subjects intentionally, always trying to tell a larger story about a society that's evolving, how traditional structures are being upended, the way these changes can make our nation more equitable and just for women, for children, for families. But we've also told another story about the way that nostalgic, regressive ideals are routinely evoked by bad actors to thwart progress, the moral panics they've incited, and the way that those panics have moved from the margins to the mainstream. Over the last several years, we've been sounding the alarm as these threats have grown more serious and more central to our politics.
We're outside the Supreme Court after the landmark decision that overturned Roe v. Wade and ended a woman's constitutional right to an abortion.
The state of Florida, we're proud to stand for education, not indoctrination in our schools.
Moms for Liberty says their focus is on securing more of what they call, quote, parental rights. But critics say they also use misinformation to push fears that kids are being indoctrinated to hate America.
According to Project 2025, not all families are created equal.
Some of former President Trump's closest allies are planning to infuse, quote, Christian nationalism into that administration.
And now, they have reached the highest echelons of power.
Former President Donald Trump will return to the Oval Office.
Ohio native J.D. Vance is set to be the next vice president.
We actually think God made male and female for a purpose.
I will take historic action to defeat the toxic poison of gender ideology.
This season, we're talking about the gender backlash. A backlash so swift and severe that it feels more like a whiplash. We're exploring the ways that gender has become a Trojan horse, a way to advance an extremist and increasingly authoritarian agenda that stands to harm millions of Americans. Over the course of this season, we'll examine the many faces of this gender backlash, the ways it's showing up in our policy, our culture, even the social media content we scroll past every day. And while the Trump administration may feel like the political epicenter, this gender backlash is not contained to one administration, or even to the U.S. It's global, multifaceted, and will have long-lasting impacts on all of our rights and freedoms. But to start, we need to focus on the people whose rights, whose very existence, have been threatened most directly: transgender Americans. So let's return to that day one executive order that Trump signaled was one of the highest priorities of his second presidential term.
I thought it would be good to do a little bit of a level set. I mean, we're at a moment right now where the lives of transgender people are really at the epicenter of our politics.
Sure. Well, as you know, I think it's not transgender people's lives that are at the center of our politics, but a caricature of transgender people's lives that finds itself at the center of our politics.
That's Jillian Brandstetter. She's a communications strategist at the ACLU, and she's been closely tracking the Trump administration's actions. The executive order, officially titled Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government, has far-reaching implications for trans people and for how we define gender under the law.
So first and foremost, it attempts to define the word sex in the law as based on quote-unquote biological sex, which the Trump administration believes is determined at conception. Really what they're trying to say is that the sex you are assigned at birth is the sex you are and the sex you will always be.
The executive order, or EO for short, requires the banning of what Trump calls gender ideology. Functionally, this involves denying the validity or even the existence of trans identity. It also denies transgender people basic rights.
That if transgender people face discrimination on the basis of our sex, that we are to be denied protection under federal law. They want to require any transgender person who works for the federal government to use a restroom inconsistent with their gender identity.
The EO strips trans people of the kind of legal recognition that helps ensure their safety.
For transgender people who are carrying federal documents, including U.S. passports or global entry visas or anything like that, they want to require transgender people to carry a gender marker that effectively outs them as trans and challenges their ability to travel safely, their ability to move about the world in a way that could really put them in harm.
The Trump administration also hopes to prevent transgender Americans from accessing medical care.
Accessing gender-affirming medical care through a public insurance program. They want to deny that insurance coverage.
Trump also signed another executive order
to prohibit any federal funding for gender-affirming care for people under 19.
Hospital networks around the country are faced with losing millions of dollars in federal funding and research grants if they continue to provide this care. The Justice Department has even subpoenaed hospitals to obtain confidential patient information related to gender-affirming care.
They attempt to make the cost of supporting us so high that it really becomes existential to the institution itself.
In short, this is all an attempt to erase trans people from public life. For many trans activists, that day one EO didn't come as a surprise.
I mean, I had been sounding this for 5 years and saying, this is the train we're on.
That's journalist Amara Jones. Back in 2018, during Trump's first term, she created the independent news outlet Translash Media. She could see resentment, misinformation, and hatred towards trans people growing, especially on the far right. And she wanted to warn her community of the looming threat.
And I think that it was even hard for certain people in community to hear that. Who wants to hear that? So I think that that adds to the shock of everything.
But even for Amara, who saw the writing on the wall, the reality of the Trump administration's actions hit hard.
I was shocked by the speed and the intensity of it. I expected them to gradually raise the temperature in the pot. I didn't expect them to come in and turn it on high right away. But even if it's for a person like me who understood that this could happen, it's a totally different thing to be experiencing it. Nothing prepares you for what it feels like.
Many of us, especially those who had been following the issue less closely than Amara, may have been surprised to see this EO be the first order of business of Trump's new administration. After all, the number of transgender people is quite small. According to the best estimates, fewer than 2% of the total U.S. population. So for us, the question was why? Why did transgender people, or as Jillian says, this caricature of transgender people, become the Trump administration's most pressing political concern? One reason is ideological.
I think that the main thing is that we have to realize that the Republican Party is fundamentally different than the Republican Party that most people have known up until, I would say, literally 2016. That party's gone. And it's been supplanted by a Christian nationalist party. And Christian nationalism is the fusion of American nationalism with Christianity and an understanding that America needs to be a Christian nation in order to be successful. And a key part of both the fused elements of their ideology is a belief in patriarchy, and specifically a belief in white patriarchy. And patriarchy, of course, is the idea that men should rule and everyone should be subservient to them, including women whose main role is to support the patriarch and to continue to procreate.
This is a belief system that many of us assumed was a thing of the past, or at least relegated to the fringes of society. But it's now become the central animating force of the modern-day conservative movement. Every day, this Christian nationalist faction inches closer to their ultimate goal, the restoration of a mid-20th century social order, that white picket fence ideal that we keep coming back to on this show.
And so within that universe, trans people can't exist.
The maintenance of the gender binary, two separate immutable genders linked to biological sex, is essential to the maintenance of a gender hierarchy, to families, communities, and a whole society in which men and women play separate and unequal roles. And over the last decade, conservatives have watched this foundational tenet of their worldview grow increasingly shaky. Beginning in the early 2010s, trans visibility changed drastically. With the help of social media, trans Americans built large online networks and shared their stories in their own voices. Here's Jillian again.
We had always been visible in the public eye. What had changed is that suddenly we were demanding the right to tell our own story. It allowed us to challenge how we were being portrayed, discussed, and regulated and policed within culture and politics.
Trans actors landed major film and TV roles in popular shows like Pose and Orange is the New Black. We saw buzzy headlines as celebrities like Caitlyn Jenner came out as trans. And perhaps most famously, in 2014, Time magazine featured actress Laverne Cox on their cover, declaring that our nation had reached the transgender tipping point. The changes went beyond pop culture. More openly trans politicians began running for office and winning. The Obama administration barred healthcare corporations from discriminating on the basis of gender identity, enabling many trans people to access gender-affirming care and transition surgery. Then in 2020, the Supreme Court held in Bostock versus Clay County that workplace protections against sex discrimination apply to trans people. All of this seemed like major progress. But to the right,
this was greeted as an existential loss. There's a sense that they were losing the culture and that they were losing in the courts as well. Josh Hawley, whose wife Erin Hawley is an attorney for the Alliance Defending Freedom, he said that this was, quote, the end of the conservative legal movement.
Reversing these gains became imperative to the survival of the Christian Nationalist Project. But it was also politically pragmatic. To change policy, the right needed to win. And in order to win,
they have to make inroads and form conversations and alliances with people who they wouldn't normally be in conversation with.
Amara Jones again.
We're talking about educated suburban moms, specifically outside of major cities in the North and the Midwest. They have to be in conversation with Latino evangelicals, conservative elements of the Black community, including the Black church.
And quite frankly, core elements of their agenda weren't playing too well with the American public. Here's Jillian.
And they know that this overturning of Roe v. Wade and the federal right to an abortion with it is going to be disastrously unpopular. They have seen the polls, they have run the focus groups, they know this is going to be awful. And they know that their allies in political office are going to need something else to keep a hold of their base and to energize their base in the face of the blowback that they're going to get.
And so
they use transphobia, trans issues, as a way to make those inroads because they understand that in modern American elections, the way that you get to absolute power is through very marginal, slim majorities.
Quite simply, the right buckled down and got to work. What felt to many of us like a spontaneous explosion of anti-trans rhetoric and policy proposals was actually the result of years of planning and strategy development.
So I think that the main thing that we have to understand is that the phenomenon that we are facing right now is the result of a lot of intelligent brain work. So the American Principles Project, which is a right-wing policy think tank, did some deep focus work around what resonated and what made people the most uncomfortable about trans people.
They eventually landed on one key issue: trans girls in sports.
And tonight, a debate continues over transgender student athletes competing in girls' sports.
Should trans athletes be allowed to compete?
Should transgender girls and women be allowed to play school sports on the girls' and women's teams? And why did this suddenly become a pressing legislative issue all across America?
Several states have passed laws this year barring transgender children from playing on sports teams that align with their gender identity.
Conservatives had found their perfect wedge issue, and they used it to blow open the door to a much broader legislative agenda.
Over the last 5 years, we've seen now over 1,500 pieces of legislation introduced in state houses across the country, just targeting transgender people, including over 80 of them being signed into law.
As red states became increasingly hostile to transgender people, individuals and families struggled to find care and maintain a sense of autonomy and personal safety.
I have spoken with families across the country who have been forced to relocate entirely, sometimes leaving the only homes they've ever known. And in fact, I know at least one family that has left the country entirely. I also know that there are countless more who are being forced to watch their child suffer in ways that they may pay for the rest of their life. Knowing that there is a politician standing between their family doctor and their best medical judgment. And the Trump administration's effort to take that national has been terrifying and abhorrent.
This flurry of state legislation may have served as the basis for the Trump administration's executive order, but it was only one part of the right strategy. The other? Flood the zone with mis- and disinformation.
They've constructed an entire pipeline that takes rumor and conjecture that is intentionally planted and then moves that through an entire network of websites and then pseudo-news sites and organizations like the Daily Wire, which has Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh, then to people like Joe Rogan, from Joe Rogan to Bill Maher, then to Fox News, and then because it's become such a loud conversation, it then bleeds into places like the New York Times. And so they've built this infrastructure whose entire job is to disinform, but because it seems organic and that it grows loud over time, people don't notice that they're being manipulated.
And now, it's amazing how easily the misinformation that conservatives so carefully seeded rears its head, even in everyday conversations.
And even if you're at a cocktail party and someone that you trust goes, I don't know about trans kids in sports. I support trans people overall, but not trans kids in sports. You think that you're just engaging on an issue of the day. But you don't understand that even the issue coming up and the framing that you have is a result of disinformation.
At the epicenter of this trans misinformation pipeline has been the issue of gender-affirming care for kids.
So one of the best examples is a study by a doctor called Lisa Littman.
In 2018, Lisa Littman was working at Brown University's School of Public Health. That year, she published a paper about trans youth. It explored a phenomenon she dubbed rapid onset gender dysphoria.
And that study essentially posits that transness and the number of kids who are identifying as trans, which is still minuscule, is the result of kind of a social contagion.
Basically, she claimed that kids who learn about transgender identity at school or through social media might then mistakenly think that they are trans.
That then was taken up by Abigail Schreier in her book, Irreversible Damage, who cited Lisa Littman and who also spoke about this idea that providing gender-affirming care for kids damages them in ways that are irreversible. That book was then picked up by a variety of places, including Bill Maher. Now, fast forward, the ideas and even the name of Lisa Littman have been included in New York Times pieces as proof points for trans skepticism for youth.
Essentially, the question was, can we trust kids to know themselves? Or is being trans just another fad? Another way for teens to explore their identity, like piercing their nose or dyeing their hair blue? But there was a big problem at the heart of this debate. The methodology in Littman's original study was really flawed. She recruited research participants largely from websites and online forums for parents skeptical of their children's gender identity. Even more concerning, she didn't speak with any trans kids directly. The journal where she'd first presented her findings issued a correction, explaining that rapid onset gender dysphoria is not a formal mental health diagnosis. But the idea of trans identity as a social contagion had already taken hold. Podcasters and politicians readily adopted the term. Eventually, dozens of professional organizations, including the American Psychological Association and the American Psychiatric Association spoke out against the rapid onset gender dysphoria hypothesis. They claimed that it lacked empirical evidence. But it was too late. Issues of trans rights, like access to gender-affirming care for minors, had become mired in controversy. Controversy that left plenty of room for conservatives to ignite a gender backlash, and for millions of Americans to be receptive to it.
You see how shifting the public conversation both changes the political environment and then creates the justification for anti-trans laws.
This misinformation pipeline has been a key tool in helping popularize the attacks on trans people. But the right strategy doesn't stop there. At the same time that conservatives have incited a panic over bathrooms, trans girls in sports, and gender-affirming care for minors, they have grown awfully quiet on other key issues, like the rollback of reproductive rights. This is not by accident. It's an intentional tactic meant to neutralize opposition to their larger political project. The right may frame transgender rights and reproductive rights as two very different issues, but in reality, they are closely linked.
So because the origin of this issue comes down to a need to assert patriarchal control and the control over people's bodies, there's no way that the trans issue is just about trans people. The things that they are doing to control the bodies of trans people and the ability of trans people to exist in public space will be rolled out to everyone else.
In fact, embedded in the executive order is language that has significant implications for women's reproductive freedom. The EO defines male and female as categories that are determined at conception, based on a human's chromosomal makeup. And by defining gender in this new and very controversial way, the administration
asserted the right of the federal government to be interested in a woman's womb to determine the outcome of gender. And that's the first time that that's happened. They shifted the conversation about woman's body to fetus. They never said, we are asserting state control over a woman's reproductive organs, because that wouldn't go over as well. What they're doing with trans issues says that it's about asserting two genders, but in doing so is actually breaking new ground in the control over women's bodies.
What's even more galling is that the right has managed to break this new ground that can be used to further erode women's bodily autonomy under the guise of protecting women. As we mentioned earlier, the name of the EO begins with the words, defending women from gender ideology extremism. Does eroding trans rights defend women? To Amara, the notion is patently absurd.
If we really wanted to protect women, we would do a better job of holding men accountable. I know too many women, both cis and trans, who have experienced some form of sexual assault from a man. We all know someone, father, brother, husband, stranger, teacher, coach, doctor. Literally, the list goes on. So I think the idea of protecting women, this is so terrible because, yes, women do need to be protected, but overwhelmingly people need to be protected from predatory men.
But this kind of framing, Jillian says, is intentional. It's meant to send signals to an important demographic.
I don't think the audience for that is actually women themselves as a group. I think it's men. I think that this notion of protecting women has strong appeal for a lot of men because it allows them to distract from the fact that the person who is the gravest threat to the women in their life is themselves. So the idea that there is some strange, weird other that you don't fully understand that could be castigated as quote unquote a threat, that's really appealing to a lot of men who also get, I think, a lot of validation out of this sense of being quote unquote a protector. But of course, that very notion that men are to be the protectors of vulnerable women is itself a keystone of patriarchal dominance and domestic violence.
If the Christian Nationalist Project succeeds, we all stand to lose a great deal. Reproductive autonomy, the right to marry whom we choose, regardless of gender, non-discrimination protections for gay and trans people, women, racial and religious minorities, women's right to vote, all of the benefits of a pluralistic society. We know their endgame. They've literally written it out in their Project 2025 manifesto. And unfortunately, the right's effort, their attempt to cement the gender binary, to promote a patriarchal worldview, to use transgender rights as a wedge to distract people from their broader project. It's working. At a moment when we should be doing all that we can to stop this extremist movement dead in its tracks, too many are seemingly acquiescing. In the wake of the 2024 election, many supposedly progressive elected officials have gone quiet on the issue of transgender rights. Or worse yet, adopted the rights framing on the issue.
Gavin Newsom taking some criticism after his comments about trans athletes in women's sports.
Democrats like Gavin Newsom and Pete Buttigieg, well, they're switching gears.
Would you say no men in female sports?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that.
Most reasonable people would recognize that there are serious fairness issues when a trans athlete wants to compete in women's sports.
Massachusetts Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton arguing the party swung so far left on transgender rights, they lost step with the majority of voters.
This shift, Imara argues, is misguided, even dangerous.
Well, appeasement never turns out well. I can't think of a historical example where it's actually worked. And it gives false hope that there's a way to bargain with authoritarians. And again, I can't find a lesson from history where that's true.
Next time on White Picket Fence, we'll go deeper into the ways that far-right populist leaders have used similar attacks on women and LGBTQ people as a tool to consolidate power.
Nazis were not a foregone conclusion. Hatred rolls downhill like a snowball. It begins with this seed of hate at the top, and it starts rolling and picking things up as it goes.
And we'll delve more deeply into the connection between these attacks, what some call the anti-gender movement, and authoritarianism.
Authoritarians often will frame male dominance as either biologically determined or as something that's divinely ordained, like God made men to lead. And so relying on the argument that gender hierarchies, gender inequality is inherent and fixed and cannot be changed allows authoritarians to frame their power as natural, even inevitable, even moral.